Imagine receiving a tax bill for income you never actually saw, never touched, never realized. For Charles and Kathleen Moore, this became a jarring reality, thrusting them into a legal battle that would ultimately reach the highest court in the land and redefine fundamental aspects of American tax law. Their investment in a modest Indian agricultural company unexpectedly triggered a constitutional showdown over the very definition of income under the 16th Amendment. This wasn't about tax evasion, it was about a novel interpretation of tax law that left many wondering if Congress's taxing power had stretched too far. The Moore struggle illuminated a critical fault line in America's financial regulations, impacting everything from international corporate structures to the future of potential wealth taxes. The story begins in August 2005, thousands of miles away from American shores, in Bangalore, India. There, Mr. Ravindra Agrawal and Mrs. Sarika Agrawal founded KisanKraft Machine Tools Private Limited. Their mission was deeply rooted in social impact, to empower India's small and marginal farmers by providing affordable, efficient agricultural equipment. Ravindra Agrawal himself had spent over 15 years working for Microsoft Corporation in the United States before returning to his homeland, driven by a personal passion for agriculture and a desire to uplift rural communities. This commitment to a noble cause attracted investors like Charles and Kathleen Moore, who saw potential not just for profit, but for positive change. In either 2005 or 2006, Charles and Kathleen Moore, American citizens, invested an initial $40,000 in KisanKraft, securing an ownership stake reported as either 11% or 13% of the common shares. Their involvement wasn't passive. Charles Moore served as a director for the company for 5 years, and the couple made additional investments totaling $150,000 over time. KisanKraft, headquartered in Bengaluru with a manufacturing unit in Nellore, India, thrived, developing a distribution network of approximately 3,000 dealers in 15 regional offices by November 2022. From 2006 to 2017, the company generated substantial income, but in line with its growth strategy, it consistently reinvested these earnings, distributing no dividends to its shareholders. The financial landscape shifted dramatically in 2017 with the enactment of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, or TCJA. Within this sweeping legislation was Internal Revenue Code Section 965, better known as the Mandatory Repatriation Tax, or MRT. This one-time tax sought to impose a levy on the accumulated, undistributed earnings of controlled foreign corporations (CFCs) from 1986 to 2017. The critical detail was that this tax applied whether or not the income was actually repatriated to the United States. For investors like the Moores, who had never received a dime of KisanKraft's profits, this provision created an unprecedented and deeply contentious financial obligation. For the 2017 tax year, the MRT hit the Moores with a bill of $14,729. This tax was levied on their pro rata share of KisanKraft's accumulated income, which amounted to $132,512. The core of their argument quickly crystallized: how could they be taxed on income they had never actually realized or received? They argued that the MRT was an unconstitutional direct tax because it violated the Direct Tax Clause of the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 4, which requires such taxes to be apportioned among the states. This legal challenge wasn't just about their personal tax burden, it questioned the very bedrock of federal taxing authority. After paying the $14,729, the Moores swiftly filed a claim for a refund, arguing the MRT's unconstitutionality. When their claim was denied, they escalated the matter, filing a lawsuit in the United States District Court for the Western District of Washington in 2020. Their primary contention was that the MRT amounted to an unapportioned direct tax on their property, their shares in KisanKraft, rather than on income as defined by the 16th Amendment. However, the district court sided with the government, dismissing the Moore suit. The court ruled that the MRT indeed constituted a tax on income and, despite its retroactive application, did not violate the Fifth Amendment's Due Process Clause. This initial defeat set the stage for a prolonged appellate battle. Undeterred, Charles and Kathleen Moore appealed the district court's decision to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. On June 7, 2022, a panel of circuit judges Ronald M. Gould, Jacqueline H. Schwingwing, and Mark J. Bennett issued a ruling that further solidified the government's position. The Ninth Circuit affirmed the dismissal, reiterating that the MRT was a permissible tax on income. Crucially, their decision explicitly stated, whether the taxpayer has realized income does not determine whether a tax is constitutional. This bold pronouncement directly challenged the Moore's central argument and seemed to open the door to broader interpretations of congressional taxing power, pushing the case inevitably towards the Supreme Court. With two lower courts having rejected their arguments, the Moores took their fight to the highest judicial authority in the United States. On February 21, 2023, they formally appealed to the Supreme Court. The court granted certiorari on June 26, 2023, agreeing to hear the case and address the pivotal question whether the 16th Amendment authorizes Congress to tax unrealized sums without apportionment among the states. Adding a layer of intrigue, Justice Samuel Alito faced public calls for recusal in September 2023. These calls arose after he had been interviewed by David B. Rivkin, one of the Moore's attorneys, for an article in the Wall Street Journal. Justice Alito, however, firmly rejected these demands, asserting his impartiality. The anticipation was palpable on December 5, 2023, as the Supreme Court convened to hear oral arguments in Moore v. United States. Representing the Moores, Andrew M. Grossman faced off against Solicitor General Elizabeth B. Prelogar, arguing for the United States. Grossman stressed the Moore's central claim, that income must be realized by the taxpayer before it can be constitutionally taxed without apportionment. Prelogar countered by highlighting Congress's long-standing authority to attribute an entity's realized income to its shareholders, citing precedents like Subpart F income for controlled foreign corporations, S-corporations, and partnerships. The justices probed deeply into the historical understanding of income and the potential far-reaching consequences of either outcome, particularly for the viability of the existing U.S. tax code. On June 20, 2024, the Supreme Court delivered its highly anticipated 7-2 decision, affirming the judgment of the Ninth Circuit. Justice Brett Kavanaugh authored the majority opinion, joined by Chief Justice John Roberts and Justices Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, and Ketanji Brown Jackson. The court upheld the MRT, ruling that it did not exceed Congress's constitutional authority. The majority opinion carefully navigated the treacherous waters of the realization question, emphasizing Congress's broad power to tax and its historical practice of taxing shareholders on an entity's undistributed income. Crucially, the court focused on the fact that the income had been realized by the corporation, KisanKraft, and Congress had the legislative choice to attribute that income to its shareholders for tax purposes. While agreeing with the outcome, two justices offered separate concurring opinions, highlighting the complex legal nuances. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson filed a concurring opinion, aligning with the majority's conclusion. Justice Amy Coney Barrett, joined by Justice Samuel Alito, also concurred in the judgment but expressed reservations about certain aspects of the majority's reasoning. They suggested that the 16th Amendment might not authorize Congress to tax unrealized sums without apportionment and that the power to attribute corporate income might be more limited than the majority implied. Their concurrence primarily stemmed from the Moore's concession on the constitutionality of Subpart F, which they viewed as functionally similar to the MRT in its attribution of corporate income to shareholders. Justices Clarence Thomas and Neil Gorsuch vehemently dissented, arguing that the MRT should have been struck down as unconstitutional. Justice Thomas, in his dissenting opinion, asserted a stricter interpretation of the 16th Amendment, stating that income is defined as only income realized by the taxpayer, meaning income that has been separated from its source. Since the Moores never received any distributions or dividends from KisanKraft, he viewed the tax as an unconstitutional tax on unrealized capital gains. The dissent warned that the majority's broad interpretation could pave the way for future taxes on mere ownership, potentially undermining fundamental constitutional protections against unapportioned direct taxes. The Supreme Court's decision was notably narrow, upholding the MRT without definitively resolving the fundamental question of whether realization is a constitutional prerequisite for all income taxes. This strategic sidestepping leaves the broader debate open for future cases, particularly concerning the constitutionality of a potential federal wealth tax. Many legal scholars and interest groups closely watched Moore v. United States for its implications on such taxes. A ruling for the Moores, establishing a strict realization requirement, could have significantly hampered efforts to implement wealth taxes. The majority opinion explicitly avoided addressing taxes on holdings, wealth, or net worth, thus leaving the door open for future challenges without providing a definitive constitutional answer. Ultimately, the court's decision averted a massive disruption to the federal tax system. A ruling in favor of the Moores could have potentially invalidated or unsettled vast portions of the U.S. tax code, including fundamental aspects that have been in place for decades. Estimates suggested such an outcome could have cost the U.S. Treasury over $300 billion in refund claims and reduced future revenue. The decision strongly reaffirms Congress's long-standing authority to tax shareholders or partners on the undistributed income of entities treated as pass-throughs, bolstering the constitutionality of existing tax structures like Subpart F for controlled foreign corporations, S-corporations, and partnerships. While the MRT was upheld, the deep divisions among the justices ensure that the debate over the definition of income under the 16th Amendment will continue to shape American constitutional law.